I found out my parents secretly left everything to my brother, the house, even the car my grandma bought me. So I quietly stopped covering their bills. 2 months later, my dad texted, "The water's been shut off." No apology, just demands. I replied, "Try asking the son you trust so much." I, 32 discovered the truth on a Tuesday afternoon in March, purely by accident. I'd stopped by my parents' house to drop off groceries, something I'd been doing weekly for the past 3 years since Dad's stroke left him partially disabled and Mom's arthritis made shopping difficult. The front door was unlocked as usual, and I let myself in, calling out to let them know I'd arrived. No response. I figured they were napping, so I started putting away the groceries quietly. That's when I saw the folder on the kitchen table. Estate planning documents, clearly marked, sitting right there in plain sight. I shouldn't have looked. I knew that even as my hand reached for it. But something about the way it was just left out there, casual and unconcealed, made me curious. Maybe they wanted to discuss it with me. Maybe they were finally organizing things properly. I opened it and felt the floor tilt beneath me. Everything went to my brother. The house I'd grown up in, the one I'd helped maintain for years, the one where I'd spent countless weekends fixing the roof, repainting rooms, replacing the water heater on my own dime. All to him. Their savings split unevenly, with him getting 70%. And there, listed in black and white, was my car. The 2015 sedan my grandmother had specifically bought for me before she died. The one she'd handed me the keys to with tears in her eyes, telling me she wanted me to have something reliable. The title had been in my parents' names for insurance purposes when I was younger, and I'd never bothered transferring it because I trusted them. It was all going to him. My brother, who lived 2 states away, who called maybe once every few months, who hadn't visited in over a year. My brother, who'd borrowed money from them repeatedly and never paid it back. My brother, who had a good job and a wife and no debt, but somehow always needed more. I stood there in that kitchen, the afternoon lights streaming through the curtains Mom had asked me to hang last summer, and something fundamental shifted inside me. Not anger, not yet. Just a cold, clarifying realization that I'd been playing a role in a story where I was never meant to matter. I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it. I finished putting away the groceries. I left without saying goodbye. That night, I lay awake doing calculations. For 3 years, I'd been covering their utility bills. It started after Dad's stroke when their medical expenses piled up and they were struggling. I'd offered to help temporarily, just until they got back on their feet. Temporary became permanent. Electric, water, gas, internet. Around $600 a month, sometimes more in winter. I'd also been buying their groceries, handling their prescriptions, paying for their lawn care service because Dad couldn't do it anymore, and hiring someone seemed like the kind thing to do. I'd been pouring roughly $1,000 a month into supporting them, and they'd thank me by writing me out of their future entirely. The next morning, I started making changes. I didn't announce anything. I didn't confront them. I simply stopped paying their bills. I called the utility companies and removed my payment information. I canceled the lawn service. I stopped showing up with groceries every week. I didn't block their numbers. I didn't cut contact. I just became unavailable in the same way my brother had been for years. When Mom called asking if I was coming by, I told her I was busy with work. When Dad texted about whether I could pick up his medications, I said I had a conflict. Always polite. Always brief. Never an explanation. The first month passed quietly. I assumed they were living off their Social Security and whatever savings they had left. I try not to think about it too much. I focused on my own life, my own bills, my own future that apparently needed more attention than I'd been giving it. The second month, the text started changing tone. Dad asked if everything was okay, if I was upset about something. I replied that everything was fine, just busy. Mom called and left voicemails wondering if they'd done something wrong. I texted back that they hadn't. I was just swamped with work projects. It wasn't entirely a lie. I'd picked up extra hours deliberately, filling the time I used to spend helping them. Then came the text that changed everything. 2 months and 1 week after I'd found that folder, my phone buzzed at 8 in the morning. Dad's message read, "The water's been shut off. We need you to call them and get it turned back on today. Your mother can't go without water." No greeting. No question about how I was doing. No acknowledgement that I'd been distant. Just a demand, presented as though I existed solely to solve their problems. I stared at that text for a long time. My finger hovered over the keyboard, dozens of responses forming and dissolving in my mind. I could be cruel. I could lay out everything I knew, every hurt and betrayal. I could itemize the money I'd spent, throw it in their faces like evidence in a trial. Instead, I typed back, "Try asking the son you trust so much." I hit send and turned off my phone. The silence that followed was broken 3 hours later when I turned my phone back on to 47 missed calls and 23 text messages. Mom, Dad, and for the first time in months, my brother. I read through them in order, watching the progression from confusion to anger to desperation. Mom wanted to know what I meant. Dad demanded I explain myself immediately. My brother's messages were different, though. He asked what was going on, why our parents were calling him hysterical about water being shut off, and me refusing to help. There was an edge of irritation in his texts, the tone of someone being dragged into drama they didn't want to deal with. I replied only to my brother. I told him our parents needed help with their bills, that I'd been handling it, but couldn't anymore, and that since he was inheriting everything, perhaps he should start contributing now. I kept it factual, emotionless. His response came 20 minutes later. He claimed he didn't know what I was talking about, that he hadn't asked for anything. I sent him a photo of the estate planning documents, the pages clearly showing the distribution of assets. I'd gone back and taken pictures the following week when my parents were at a doctor's appointment, needing evidence for myself that I hadn't imagined it. He went silent after that. Mom called next. I answered this time, figuring I owed her at least a conversation. She launched immediately into questions about the water, about why I hadn't responded sooner, about what that text to Dad meant. I let her finish before asking if we could talk about the estate planning instead. The line went quiet for several long seconds. Then she asked how I knew about that. I told her I'd seen the documents on the kitchen table. I didn't apologize for looking. She started explaining immediately, words tumbling over each other about how they'd been meaning to talk to me about it, how it wasn't what it looked like, how they were just trying to be fair in a complicated situation. I asked her to explain how leaving everything to one son while the other had been financially supporting them for years was fair. I asked her to explain how giving away a car my grandmother had specifically given to me was anything other than a betrayal. My voice stayed calm, but each question landed like a stone. She got defensive then. She said my brother had struggled more in life, that he needed the security more than I did. She pointed out that I had a good job, that I was stable, that I'd always been the responsible one. She actually used that phrase, as though being reliable meant I deserved less. I asked if my brother knew he was inheriting the car Grandma gave me. She admitted he didn't, that they'd just included it in the assets without specifying its history. I asked if they'd planned to tell me before they died, or if I was supposed to discover it while grieving. She started crying then, saying I was being cruel, that she'd never expected this kind of coldness from me. I told her I'd learned from the best, and ended the call. Update 1. The fallout escalated faster than I'd anticipated. Within 2 days, my brother drove up from his home state, apparently unable to resolve things by phone. He showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Saturday morning, looking exhausted and annoyed in equal measure. He demanded to know why I was doing this, why I was punishing our parents over an inheritance I wouldn't even receive for years, potentially decades. He said I was being petty and vindictive, that family was supposed to support each other unconditionally. I invited him in and made coffee, staying deliberately calm while he paced my living room working himself up. When he finally ran out of steam, I asked him a simple question. How much had he contributed to their care in the past 3 years? He deflected, saying he lived far away. That distance made regular help impossible. I pressed the point, asking specifically about money. How much had he sent? How many bills had he paid? Had he offered anything beyond occasional phone calls? He admitted he hadn't contributed financially, but insisted he'd been dealing with his own expenses, his own life. His wife had student loans. They were saving for a house. They had their own struggles. I nodded and told him I understood completely. Then I pulled out my bank statements, 3 years' worth, with every payment to our parents' utilities highlighted. I prepared this knowing the conversation was coming eventually. The total came to just over $34,000, not counting groceries, medications, home repairs, and various other expenses. I showed him the numbers and explained that I wasn't punishing our parents. I was simply stepping back and letting the son they'd chosen to invest and take over the responsibilities I'd been shouldering. If he was trusted enough to inherit everything, Surely he was trusted enough to help maintain it in the meantime. He stared at those statements for a long time. When he looked up, some of the anger had drained from his face, replaced by something more complicated. He asked why I'd never said anything, why I'd let it go on so long without telling anyone how much I was spending. I told him the truth. I'd done it because I loved them, because they needed help, because it was the right thing to do. I'd never wanted recognition or repayment. But discovering they'd been planning to exclude me so completely while I was actively supporting them had fundamentally changed how I saw the relationship. I couldn't keep giving to people who'd already decided I didn't deserve to receive. He sat down heavily on my couch and asked what I wanted. Did I want the will changed? Did I want reimbursement? Did I want an apology? I told him I wanted honesty. I wanted our parents to admit why they'd structured things the way they had, without hiding behind excuses about fairness or need. And I wanted them to understand that being the reliable son didn't mean being the disposable one. He left an hour later, promising to talk to them. I didn't hold my breath. Update 2. The conversation I'd been avoiding finally happened 2 weeks later. Both parents showed up at my apartment, my brother having apparently convinced them that a face-to-face meeting was necessary. Dad looked frilier than I'd seen him, the stress clearly taking a physical toll. Mom's eyes were red, evidence of recent crying. We sat in my living room, the same space where I'd confronted my brother, and I waited for them to speak first. Dad opened by saying they'd made mistakes in how they handled things. He acknowledged that the estate planning had been done poorly, that they should have talked to me first. I asked why they didn't, why they thought it was acceptable to leave those documents out where I could find them, but never actually have the conversation. Mom answered this time. She admitted they'd been afraid of how I'd react, that they'd kept putting it off because they knew I'd be hurt. She said they'd convinced themselves they had more time, that they'd find the right moment eventually. I pointed out that avoiding difficult conversations didn't make them less necessary, just more painful when they finally happened. I asked again about the reasoning behind their decisions. Dad took a breath and explained. My brother had gone through a bankruptcy 5 years ago, something I'd known about, but not the full extent of. It had devastated him financially and emotionally. Our parents had watched him struggle, had helped him quietly in ways I hadn't known about. They'd wanted to ensure he had stability when they were gone, a foundation to rebuild on. I asked where I fit into that concern. Had they not noticed I was the one providing their stability right now? Did my reliability mean I didn't deserve consideration? Mom jumped in, saying that wasn't it at all. They'd always been proud of me, always known I'd be fine. I was successful, independent, strong. My brother needed more help. They were trying to balance things out over the course of our lives, not just in the moment. I let the words hang there for a moment before responding. I told them I understood wanting to help a struggling child, but that didn't justify taking from one to give to another without consent. The car wasn't theirs to give away. It was a specific gift from my grandmother to me, and including it in my brother's inheritance wasn't balancing anything. It was theft. Dad flinched at the word. He tried to argue that it was just a car, that I could get another one. I cut him off and asked if he'd feel the same way if I took something Mom's mother had left specifically to her and gave it to my brother because he needed it more. The silence that followed was profound. Mom finally broke it by saying they'd changed the will. They'd removed the car, split things more evenly. She asked what else I needed to make this right. I told them I didn't know yet. I needed time to process the fact that the people I'd trusted most had been planning to betray that trust. I needed them to understand that reconciliation wasn't automatic just because they'd been caught and forced to make changes. Then I asked the question that had been burning in my mind for weeks. If I hadn't found those documents, if I'd never known, would they have ever told me? Would I have shown up to their funerals someday, grieving and vulnerable, only to discover then that my brother was getting everything and the car I drove daily wasn't actually mine? Neither of them could answer. Update 3. 3 months have passed since that conversation in my living room. The changes have been slow and uncomfortable, the kind of gradual rebuilding that doesn't come with dramatic reconciliation scenes or tearful apologies that fix everything. My parents did change their will. I insisted on seeing the new documents, on having my own copy, on knowing exactly what they'd promised this time. The estate is now split evenly between my brother and me. The car title has been transferred to my name alone, finally and officially. They've also added a clause specifying that certain items with sentimental value be distributed according to who originally received them as gifts. But the money part was never really the point. The point was understanding how little they'd valued my contributions, how easily they'd dismissed my role in their lives while elevating his. That knowledge doesn't disappear with a revised will. I've resumed helping them, but on different terms. I pay their water bill only. Just that one utility, and I've made it clear it's because I don't want Dad's health to suffer, not because I've forgotten what happened. They cover everything else themselves, which has meant some belt-tightening on their end. My brother sends them money now too, not a huge amount but consistent. Apparently our conversation had more impact than I'd expected. The grocery deliveries haven't resumed. I've shown Mom how to use grocery delivery apps instead, helped her set up accounts and payment methods. She's managing, though she's complained about the delivery fees. I've remained firm. They need to learn to function without depending on me for every little thing. My brother and I have an awkward but functional relationship now. He apologized, actually apologized, for not being more involved and for benefiting from their favoritism without questioning it. He admitted he'd always known on some level that I did more for them, but he'd convinced himself it was because I wanted to, because I was better at that kind of thing. The apology didn't erase anything, but it mattered. Dad and I barely speak beyond practical necessities. He's never actually said the words, "I'm sorry." He's implied regret, danced around the edges of accountability, but he can't seem to force out a direct apology. I've stopped waiting for one. Some people aren't capable of that kind of vulnerability, especially not with their children. Mom tries harder. She calls weekly, asks about my life, shares neighborhood gossip like she's trying to rebuild normalcy through sheer persistence. Sometimes I engage, sometimes I don't. I'm still deciding how much of a relationship I want with them going forward. The hardest part has been accepting that the parents I thought I had, the ones who valued both their sons equally, never really existed. They were a story I'd told myself, a narrative I'd believed because I needed to. The real people are more complicated, more flawed, more human. They love me, I don't doubt that. But their love comes with conditions and hierarchies I'd been blind to. I've started therapy, working through the anger and betrayal with a professional who doesn't have a stake in family harmony. She's helped me understand that protecting myself isn't the same as punishing them, that boundaries aren't weapons even if they feel like it to people used to having none. Last week, Dad texted asking if I'd come over to help reset their router. The internet was down, and he couldn't figure out the technical stuff. My first instinct was to go, to solve the problem like I always had. Instead, I sent him a YouTube link to a tutorial and suggested he try it himself first. If he still couldn't manage it, I said, he could call his internet provider's tech support. He figured it out. Took him an hour and apparently involved some creative swearing, but he got it working. He sent me a message afterward, just 3 words, "Got it working." I replied, "Proud of you." I meant it. Not in a condescending way, but genuinely. He'd solved his own problem instead of immediately outsourcing it to me. It was a small thing, meaningless to anyone else, but to me it represented a shift. He was learning to be less dependent. I was learning that not rushing to fix things didn't make me a bad son. I don't know what the long term looks like. Maybe we'll rebuild something better, more honest, less unbalanced. Maybe we'll remain at this careful distance indefinitely. Family in name, but not in the way we used to be. Maybe time will soften the edges enough that genuine closeness becomes possible again. What I do know is this. I'm no longer the son who gives without question, who supports without acknowledgement, who absorbs hurt without consequence. I've become someone who expects reciprocity, who demands honesty, who walks away when the cost of staying is too high. My grandmother, the one who gave me that car, used to tell me that love without respect is just obligation dressed up pretty. I didn't understand what she meant when I was younger. I thought love was supposed to be unconditional, that family meant accepting whatever came your way. Now I understand. She was teaching me that I deserved better than to be taken for granted, even by the people who raised me, especially by them. The car runs perfectly. I maintain it carefully, change the oil regularly, keep it clean. Sometimes when I'm driving alone, I think about her, about the way she pressed those keys into my palm and told me to take care of myself first. I wish I'd listened sooner. I wish she'd lived to see me finally learn the lesson. But I'm learning it now. That has to count for something.